For my professional learning community project, I chose to focus on transformative learning and social justice education, specifically through the integration of Photovoice methods into a course about diverse populations. My name is Marcela Gutierrez, and I am an assistant professor in practice at the School of Social Work here at the University of Texas at Arlington. Through this presentation, I'll share the meaning of authentic learning in an online environment. I'll talk a little bit about the Photovoice method and share some examples. I'll share my evaluation plan for this project, and then I'll offer some tentative recommendations that have already been shared with me as part of this process. Authentic learning is essentially an instructional approach that's used to encourage students to make sure that they can take what is being taught in the classroom and connect it to the actual world. In a professional context, especially one like social work, it's extremely important for students to be able to think and solve in a professional context, to be able to apply what they're learning in the classroom outside of the classroom, to be able to share these findings and discuss these findings with others, and to be able to create products in the classroom that they can take outside of the classroom as well. The challenge in an online environment obviously becomes that because authentic learning is so dependent on interaction and application, online instructors have to find ways for their students to interact and engage in a way that can hopefully lead to greater authentic learning. There are a lot of tools that instructors use to try to encourage that. The important thing in all of these is that discussions involve opportunities for students to ask questions. There must be an ability to go back and forth, to share ideas. They must be able to share resources, apply those ideas beyond just a conceptual level, and use media elements, use different tools to be able to incorporate those and make them relevant. So this course explores the idea of how to help students increase their authentic learning through a technique called Photovoice. Photovoice was originally a research method that combined photography with social action. It essentially was the idea of allowing people to photograph the world around them, highlighting certain themes. Those photographs then get interpreted together, and the insights from those photographs are used to direct further action. For example, if you were to look at this photograph, what would be the first thing you would think about? Some people might think that this is a statement on hygiene, or they might see this as a neglectful father. This photo actually comes from a story that talks about the struggle that many fathers have about trying to find diaper changing tables in the men's room. So this photograph serves as an opportunity for somebody to highlight themes about gender roles, parenting, maybe different ways that organizations and buildings and businesses may reinforce certain stereotypes about women as the primary caretakers for children. And this could serve to even illustrate potential ideas about how to encourage more fathers to take an active part in caring for their children by simply advocating for more businesses to include changing tables in the men's room. So transformative learning theory is in many ways the basis for applying Photovoice in this classroom specifically. And transformative learning theory essentially holds that there should be some kind of a change process that essentially transforms people's paradigm. In courses about social justice, there's often an important emphasis on having students challenge the way that they see the world, challenge their biases and their assumptions, and oftentimes do so in ways that are very uncomfortable, as it forces them to confront aspects of themselves and issues of social justice they may not have been previously as familiar with. So in this context, Photovoice is thus used to help people shift their paradigm with the assumption that by transforming that paradigm, they will be better equipped to engage in actions and behaviors that are more oriented toward that new perspective. The the foundation of that is that there has to be a single event or a series of events that are then followed by time for critical reflection. So in the classroom, the Photovoice journals are essentially that series of events that are held throughout the classroom where students are essentially going to be challenged in such a way that allows them time for critical reflection to then ultimately transform their paradigm and ultimately their actions and behaviors, or at least that's the hope. So previous efforts to do this within this classroom were met by some challenges, mainly because there was a weekly discussion board on top of the Photovoice journal. There was some confusion and overlap about the goals of those two assignments. There was also student confusion about the general goals and ethics of Photovoice. For example, students taking photographs of things that they found online versus items that in the world around them, or students taking photographs of people who had not given their consent to be photographed. There were also some challenges in being able to connect some of the different foundational ideas and patterns in the course throughout the different Photovoice journals. Because critical reflection was such an important component, oftentimes the assignment deadlines weren't necessarily lined up to encourage that. And students that were being asked to use their Photovoice journals to take action had varying levels of self-awareness and readiness, which resulted in some challenges in their ability to really take that critical reflection and modify their behavior accordingly. So this course was modified in order to help really align the Photovoice journal assignment in line with transformative learning theory. So there were some static elements of the course that weren't significantly modified. Module content remained the same, readings remained the same. Students received a video playlist with the PowerPoint for the week narrated along with some supplemental videos to highlight important concepts, and they had reading quizzes periodically. The main element that was modified was a Photovoice journal. I'll go through how I modified that. I also staggered the different deadlines in the course to reinforce some of that critical reflection. And I also modified and created additional assignments that could serve to complement the goals of the Photovoice journal assignment. So the participants in this course were 21 students in an online section, all social work students in a Master of Social Work program, taking a course about diverse populations. The main ways that the Photovoice journal was developed and refined for this course, it first required students early in the semester to take a training module. This training module was interactive through a program called VoiceThread. It reviewed the purpose of Photovoice, techniques about how to take photographs, and the ethics of what it means to take a photograph, how to interpret that photograph, how to use that photograph in an ethical way. Students then had to sign an ethical agreement stating that they had reviewed the training module and understood their ethical responsibilities. There were 10 Photovoice journals assigned to students to be completed in weeks 6 through 14 of the course. That's technically a 9-week period. There was one period in which students had 2 Photovoice journals due. And students essentially studied 10 different types of isms or different types of oppression. And so they were asked to complete 1 Photovoice journal per ism. They used the program Discus, which is an online discussion board where one can create what's called a channel, which is essentially a discussion board where one can then create various discussions around various topics. And so each ism was its own topic. The discussion board is structured to mimic social media, and so students can comment, reply to those comments, in some cases tag others. And so for those users of social media, this was a fairly intuitive program. The assignment overall was worth 30% of the final grade. And as mentioned already, the purpose then of Photovoice journals were for students to take a photograph in the world around them that reflected the ism they were studying that week. They then had to interact with each other to discuss how that photograph related to the ism. And importantly, they had to critically reflect about themselves, situating themselves within that ism, what caused that ism, how that ism was manifested, and what they could do about it. So this was done through a 3-part structure following a model that I'll show you on the following slide. Friday of each week, students had to post a photograph describing the photograph, what they saw in that photograph in very loose terms without any interpretation, what was happening. Then 2 days later, by Sunday, they had to post a reflection on 2 additional photographs that other peers posted, essentially responding and commenting on maybe how they related, things that may have agreed on or disagreed on, their reactions to it. And then the following Friday after that, they would then post their critical reflection, which was expected to take into consideration any discussion that was generated from their peer comments. So this showed model is a popular structure used in many Photovoice research projects. And so this was essentially just an adapted version of that focused on the context. So you can see the first posting of the photograph asked students to post the S and the H, again, a descriptive elements of the picture. And then the analytic elements really included a description of themselves in terms of whether they were in a privileged or an oppressed group, analyzing the causes, analyzing manifestations of that form of oppression, the levels of society in which that oppression functioned, as well as intersectionality that may have occurred. And then they also had to relate this to some type of an action strategy that could be resulting from that photograph. So in order to really support the critical reflection required for the Photovoice journal assignment, 2 other assignments were staggered. The deadlines were staggered around it. So in line with the photograph posting, the weekly discussion board was completed on VoiceThread. This weekly discussion board was essentially a chance for students simply to reflect on their personal experiences and their personal upbringing, their personal socialization related to each topic. So if students were studying racism, for example, they might talk about their racial identity and experiences of discrimination growing up. The hope was that this would allow them to reflect enough to identify an opportunity in their environment to photograph. That Sunday, they were to complete the reading quiz. The idea there is that they would at that point have a basic understanding of the core concepts of the class. And then the following Friday, that would give them 5 days to be able to reflect on what their peers told them, shared with them, to reflect on the basic concepts of the module, and to apply that analytic framework to really critically be able to apply the latter stage of the showed model. There were also 2 complementary assignments in the course that reinforced the Photovoice journal assignment. There was a concept map that was a new assignment that essentially asked students at the end of each unit throughout the course, and there were basically 4 different units. They were asked to provide a visual summary of the concepts with the idea that they would be able to take the showed model, for example, and really understand how exploitation functioned in all the different isms, or how institutional forms of oppression might occur in all the different isms. Then their final assignment was modified to allow them to have the choice between completing essentially an activity of self-reflection. This was really geared for students that may have really been challenged by the Photovoice journals, may have really experienced a significant shift in their framework. And so this would provide an opportunity to reflect on that and plan for the action that they may take. Or for those students that may have already had a fairly good understanding of themselves relative to the different isms studied and maybe were ready for action, this assignment allowed them that opportunity, which would then be followed by reflection on that action taken so that they could identify their next steps. So this again was to reinforce the critical reflection piece in that transformative learning context. So this is an example of a photograph that was shared by a student. Upon first glance, you can see it looks like some type of hearing device. And this is the student posting essentially his description of the photograph and a general description of his story, his connection related to that picture. I did specifically ask students to try to not get into too much interpretation here. And so to varying degrees, students may have just given a brief description or may have given a lot more context at this stage. This is an example of the reflection that was shared with this student. And so you see the student here is sharing ideas of, related to the concept of disability here. The student was talking about the stereotypes that are associated. The idea of universal design is implicit here with this idea of everybody having, similar access. The idea of a social construct is implied. And so here the idea is that students can take this and then apply it into the final stage, their critical analysis. And so here you see the student is able to take some of the key concepts of the class, the difference between disability and handicap, some of the reactions of people in treating people with disabilities as objects of pity, talking about ideas of accessibility, the social construction of disability. So you see the student is really able to get into the analytic of the causes of this form of oppression, as well as what can be done to help empower and advocate people, and what this student particularly can do. So this similar type of approach was taken, for example, by a student who talked about being a woman of African American descent and finding that products for her hair were moved into a different corner of the store that was specifically marked for African American hair, and her feeling of being marginalized. There was a woman who showed a picture of her mother-in-law dressed up for a night on the town and talked about the stereotypes of older women as being frigid and asexual, and talked about how her mother-in-law was able to break that stereotype. And then there was a woman talking about her privilege of having access to a membership in a country club and the feelings that came with participating in those activities, and realizing the limitations that other people had in accessing that same type of social activities. So in order to evaluate the impact of the Photovoice journal assignment, I was able to access an online survey shared by a fellow researcher. So I've adapted that survey, and this will be 29 questions that will essentially measure authentic learning, critical thinking, engagement, and interaction, where the goal is really to examine how well students have engaged in authentic learning. I'm also curious to see how critical thinking has been impacted, and I'll be using engagement and interaction as controls to see to what extent they contribute to the authentic learning or critical thinking that occurs. So my intent is to describe that and then look at potential correlations there. In lieu of those that final survey that will be completed at the end of the semester, I collected feedback in the middle of the course, and as you can see, students have already shared comments that express their interaction, or their the student said that they enjoyed the interaction. Another student talked about engagement. Another student said here, implying that this person has participated in some critical thinking and self-reflection. While there also seem to be some questions about the structure of the assignment and how well that actually fosters ongoing engagement, as well as how well this does connect to the profession and that authentic learning element. So we've got some mixed results just based on that midterm feedback through an anonymous online survey that I distributed. But I am excited to actually distribute the final survey and see how the final results compare. So I'm excited to share more. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about this project. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation.